There's nothing like the fresh countryside in the morning. Strolling through the garden, admiring the sun, the leaves, the insects, the... What the... Oh no! Here was me thinking all neighbourhood spiders were friendly. Return to the shadows, foul beast.
You shall not pass!
Obsidian were a standout from the recent Xbox event in July. They're one of the latest acquisitions for the Microsoft Game Studio portfolio, and they had 3 titles. Squeezed in between its DLC or extension pack for the Outer Worlds and its Skyrim-like RPG potential monster in Avowed was this 80s inspired Honey I Shrunk the Kids game called Grounded. This is a survival based permadeath scavenging multiplayer single player hybrid. Made from a very small subset of the wider team, around 12 in total, this is a true indie game in all but studio and support. The Rick Moranis led tail-end 80s flick carries a great influence on the title, right down to those inquisitive ants, giant water droplets for drink, and killer arachnoids aplenty.
It goes without saying, but that is a big spider.
The 80s influence continues with the main menu's 8-bit chiptune style. Now the principle is simple. As you awake and seek out to find the reason for your minuscule stature yet gargantuan predicament you find yourself in, you can play on your own or with friends via a host or join option, and you must learn new skills by analysing materials collected from the garden in the conveniently dotted research stations across. This can make food, hammer, torches and much more, and the more you collect and analyse, the greater your impact on the giant enemies. The creature quality is actually very good. Basic AI functions run for each, with them observing you or attacking you, each other, or just plodding along with their own aims. Why do these might make me long for a crowbar? This vast view of such a tiny space does bring a refreshing change to the game world, as you discover American baseballs or half-eaten hot dogs in your garden. That cheap can of pop though, must be a mistake. That's definitely got to be a Panda Pop, which is the only true cola. Must be a council house here for sure. I'm just still looking around for that discarded settee. Or sofa, if you're from the American audience. Now, being an Xbox game, it is available on PC also by default via Game Pass or Early Access on both. Now, which enables me to cover all versions right off the bat. Now, it must be stressed that this is a very much in development game using Unreal Engine 4, and as such, this is a glimpse into how a game starts and then evolves over time within the core design pillars from the team. Now, this may end up not moving much or being a No Man's Sky-like butterfly moment. As such, even the UI menu on consoles offers a great deal of choice alongside motion blur levels and FOV, but bear in mind, as these are simply rendering more triangles, textures and a larger viewport, this has a direct impact on performance, as it is far from the ideal optimization stage of tweaking and other settings to compensate for the increased throughput and fill rate this view gives. As such, all my tests here on consoles and PC are at the standard 90 degrees. Now, on this subject, is it good to spot the comparison or the comparisons between the version specs and levels. Unsurprisingly, the Xbox One S is the lowest of them all, which sports a native 1280 by 720p resolution. This is supplemented by Unreal Engine 4's temporal accumulation buffers to blend previous buffers alongside motion vectors to reduce subpixel and high frequency aliasing as the view moves around. It also attempts to use the upscale version in the Unreal Engine 4 to increase the detail using that accumulation data back to a 1920 by 1080 image, which does help movement when it's slow. Now, the image clarity can be blurry at times, with the detail lost into the mid to far distance, specifically on the depth of field pass post-process filter. The other reasons for this is the dithered pixel shading used on lights, the bloom and the shadow maps alongside other aspects. Due to the bright colour tones and relatively low composite materials, these can easily be noticed on the lower res output here, with alpha effects on squishing a bug or the flashing lights of electricity specifically standing out. Now, all versions and settings also deliver a full 24-hour cycle, which is delivered via Unreal Engine 4's light probe system, which presents quite a standard now image-based lighting model. These are effectively environmental cube maps that are captured at runtime or pre-baked across set times of day. These probes are dotted across the world, invisible to us, but used as sample points for the static and dynamic objects within the world. These laser orbs represent them perfectly and are using these low resolution maps wrapped around a spherical orb, giving a panoramic viewpoint to sample from. Many things in the game sample from these, including the GI bounce from the single light source of the sun or the moon. So do the ladybirds or ladybugs, which dynamically reflect objects in real time, sampling from these as they wander past. This does look great and is reduced in bandwidth by only having that low specular metal reflectance on the object just being a single binary colour rather than the entire colour of the world. It enables the game to softly shift the light, the material sampling and the GI as time passes, offering a more realistic look as colour tones, light irradiance and shadow maps pass over. Again, the game is using a cascaded shadow map system to keep those various ranges of resolution correct from the mid to far distance. The Xbox One X may disappoint a great many of you here though, but again this is an early dev build, it needs to be treated as such, which I also cover in the PC build. It increases the pixel fill rate by 2.25% to a native 1920 by 1080, which again uses that TAA to restore data back to a target of 4K, which matches the game's UI, just like the 1080 UI of the S. The increase in clarity is clear and welcome, with more details, fine movement, stability and general refinement noticeable at times. Now this helps reduce the stippled patterns of the shading passes mentioned earlier over the base Xbox One. It never looked close to 4K on a 4K set, but it can still look exceptional with fine details holding up well even at such a relatively low resolution. This does help another area I will cover soon though. Now the PC version obviously adds far more options to the party, which includes fixed or unlocked frame rates and a sub 1080 to native 4K being a simple click away in the menus. But you have to tread carefully here. Even on my 5600 XT, which is far more powerful than the Xbox One X, at 1080p on the epic settings, frame rates can fluctuate even with the VSync turned off here, anywhere between 100 to right down to low 60s. So you do have to get used to that variability, but it does mean that a locked 60 is achievable even at 1080p at the epic settings. You can gain a little bit more percentages back, which I'll touch on in the performance mode, but the visual quality and clarity that the epic mode offers is actually quite beneficial to the image. Shadow maps, obviously volumetric lights are all improved in quality, as is the depth of field system used within the game, actually using it in gameplay more and giving more of a depth and perspective of objects further and nearer into the distance. And actually overall the improvements are more refinements. Certainly the LOD is where the improvements come in the most. And that's where you can see the example between what the consoles run and what the PC runs. So comparing the LOD system here as a comparison, the Xbox One and the Xbox One S look to be running the medium settings of the PC at 720p and 1080p respectively. Now generally there's not a huge difference, there's not a huge missing from the epic settings to the medium settings, but you get sacrifices to things like volumetric quality, shadow resolution, lighting precision, LOD, depth of field and texture quality is lower on the Xbox One, significantly lower in fact. The best quality textures are on the Xbox One X as they are on PC, and obviously this is no surprise due to the lower budget of VRAM on the system. This has to be one of the sacrifices, and you can notice this generally across many textures in the games. Now the variety of textures is the biggest strength and weakness here. There are some strong points, there are some weak points like you've just seen, but overall the texture quality is very good. The bidirectional reflectance distribution functions for the PBR based materials is actually very good. It uses microfacets on some of the leaves and the edges, and it uses light masks and shadow masks to try and give penetration of subsurface scattering quite well. There's not a lot of composites there, but it does the job. It's not the most impressive PBR, but it is functional and it is very solid in terms of the overall presentation, giving insects a pinky translucent look. And then other materials such as rock or mud, a more opaque substance which diffuses the light a little better across its surface rather than penetration. Leaves stand out quite a lot, and the use of volumetrics is also another high point. Now the biggest sacrifices going from the epic settings or high down to the medium is you lose that real-time dynamic reflections from cube maps, or it may even be proxy capsules here, which you don't get on medium therefore consoles. You lose shadow resolution and shadow quality. The filtering is not as good, the shadow resolution is not as good, and the cascades are slightly shorter, and also screen space reflections on objects nearer to the frustum. So the example here I gave earlier with the hammer swinging around in terms of that light orb, it doesn't reflect your hand in the medium settings and then again on console. They all add up and they do make a difference to the performance, but overall you wouldn't notice them without comparing them side by side. It is early days, it isn't a massive game, it's only a 4GB download, and that obviously means that it's got reduced content. It's a small area relatively, with a very short section, but these could be improved, better textures, better additions of materials, quality, objects could all be added, but all these things collectively combine to make a pretty decent performing title overall. And therefore we move to the final piece to touch on, and that is performance. Performance is unlocked, as you would expect at this stage of a game, on consoles, and that means we get a good idea of just where the performance levels target. The Xbox One S, unsurprisingly, is the lowest of the lot at that 720p with that TAA. It hovers somewhere around the mid 35s, so it's definitely a 30 FPS title through and through on this particular machine. With some refinement and optimization, some of the features and code, they may bring it somewhere around the 900p dynamic between 720p using that TAA, but cap it at 30, that would be the best bet. And overall performance is GPU bound to 99% of the time, aside some of the saving glitches which happen on all formats. And that's more around how they're handling the IO streaming in terms of the IOPS input and output in the Unreal Engine. It's nothing to do with the hardware itself. And the Xbox One X is pretty much a 60 FPS title at 1080p. It hovers around 60 FPS more often than not, averaging at 55 FPS. So there's certainly the options here with some improvements and refinements to get it to a locked 60 mode at 1080p, and more than likely push it all the way up to 1440p at 30 FPS, or maybe a little bit higher with some refinements and tweaking. I found some of the nighttime missions, some of the combat with the bugs, with the splats and the alpha effects filling the screen, that can cause some heavier dips into the 30s, but they're usually short-lived. But again, this can make the frame rate feel a little inconsistent. But overall, when you're playing and exploring, you don't feel that, and it's pretty smooth by and large. Well, more often than not, which the average tells. And that makes it a very good performing game overall. Again, those minor hitches when it's saving, it can judder when you get some heavy load of geometry and objects and obviously enemies running around, but overall it's a pretty solid title in these early moments, and that makes for a very smooth and consistent performance by and large. But there's not a lot of epic battles in this so far, so there might be sections that actually get a little heavier. I have finished the single player in all three versions. It's very short, but it does give you a breadth of where you can go and how you can stress the engine out at certain points. And obviously here on my 5600 XT, a very powerful GPU overall, does an excellent job of running this way above 60 FPS 99.9% of the time at 1080p on epic settings. Epic's just slightly too much most of the time, just dipping under 20 or 30 FPS, but if you keep it at high settings you can hold a locked 30 FPS cap, and that feels excellent, and it's a real improvement to the visual quality, with the game drastically benefiting from that increased pixel resolution on the clarity of the textures, the details, the depth of field. All those elements bring you right back to that 80s disappearing into your garden Disney wonder that the original film had, and it, like I say, it's heavily inspired by that, and it really succeeds in delivering that kind of feel and look. Overall, I'm impressed with the performance across PC and console alike, and I think with some refinement over the next few months, this could be a great standout title for the Xbox and PC. It's a fun game to play, especially with friends, with those creepy crawly moments and sudden horror as you see a spider or a bug jump out at you, or a bunch of ants start to attack you, and that's probably one of the reasons why it's so popular with streamers at the moment. It is commendable that a bigger studio is making these kind of games amongst themselves with a much smaller subset of team. It gives them experience and time to deliver something a little bit left of field that even if you don't like, you've got to commend the fact that it just adds variety to the market, and that's never a bad thing. And really, the quality isn't that far removed from a decently delivered game of only a couple of years ago, and that's one of the benefits of having something like Unreal Engine on the market, saving all that time and effort in making your own engine. Anyway, that's it. I'm out. I hope you enjoyed this or anything else that I've put together. Please like, subscribe and all that fun stuff. I am independent, so any support you can give and any sharing and liking and commenting below is greatly beneficial and warmly welcome. I'll catch you on the next one.